Welcome to the Thursday broadcast of Wisdom in the Word. We're so glad that you're joining us today. We appreciate you taking time on your Thursday afternoon or Thursday evening or Friday or whatever it is that you listen to this to study the Bible with us and join us for not only the answers to your questions, but also some good time together. We want to encourage you, if you are following us or reading, watching us on Facebook or on YouTube, to sign in, make a comment, let us know that you're there. That would be a great blessing to us to be able to go back later and be able to look. Of course, you can like and you can also share these with those that are in your friend group. And if you share them, we may even get a few more folks joining us for Bible study and for our question answer time on Thursday. And so I don't think that would be a bad thing. So just kind of a reminder on what's happening this weekend. We still have some folks that are very sick that need your prayers, and we hope that you will continue to keep them in your prayer. I'll try and keep you updated as I get updates on how things are going on with them. Additionally, just as far as the schedule this weekend, we're planning on getting back at this point to a 9, 10, and 5 service schedule. But I will again send out a message and let you know what's happening as we get a little bit closer. We're going to give everybody a chance. We're going to kind of do a little bit of a shorter episode today. Because we're going to answer 2 questions. One's a biblical, one's a more practical question, and we'll dive into those here in just a moment. But let's give everybody a chance to jump on, find their Bibles, and then we'll begin our official audio broadcast of today's Wisdom in the Word episode. So appreciate you joining us. Give us just a minute. Welcome to the Thursday broadcast of Wisdom in the Word. We're so glad that you're joining us today. Regardless of where you're joining us, we appreciate you taking the time to listen to this podcast. Thursday is our Thoughtful Thursday broadcast where we answer questions from our listeners. And we have a couple of one biblical question today that we're going to look at in our time together. We hope that these are questions that maybe you've thought of. Some of them are questions maybe you've never thought of, and you just are getting answers to them before you ask them. Others, you may have had questions for years and just not known how to ask or even remembered that you had a question. So I want to encourage you to study the Bible along with us today. Here's our first question from a listener. It asks this question: what does a person do with proper tithing when facing retirement and income drops to just Social Security? How can you continue to increase tithing with a decrease in income? This is a question for a lot of folks, from a lot of people who are on fixed income type of thing. They get to a place where they retire. The only thing they have coming in is their Social Security or the draw that they take from their 401k or retirement account, dividends from stocks, and oftentimes things that they've accumulated over the course of years. And it's a concern because they've been accustomed to receiving a particular income. They've been accustomed to even living a particular lifestyle and might have to, cut back on the lifestyle and the choices that they make. Additionally, they're not having the same amount of money flow through on a weekly or biweekly basis, and they're relying on what they're receiving from Social Security. Let me address that first. I think that, relying solely on Social Security is a dangerous proposition. I think we as a culture have defined retirement, and we kind of rely on Social Security, but it's a supplement. The government doesn't do a great job handling money, especially handling our money. I'm not really afraid of Social Security going away, but they continue to change the rules on it, even though it's, our money that we've invested and we've paid them over the course of time. It was supposed to be separate, wasn't supposed to be touched by the federal government, and now it is. And so I think it's a good thing for believers, for all people, to have another source of income or some sort of cash flow that's outside of Social Security. Maybe not a job, sometimes a part-time job, or other means of putting money away, whether it be 401k, some sort of supplement, IRAs. There's a lot of investment things. I'm not a financier, and I'm trying to follow my own advice here in regard to this. It's very difficult when you're living life and trying to just meet your bills to be able to do that. It's something that all of us need to consider. So let me say, first off, I think it's very important that we make wise financial decisions for ourselves and for our future. I know a lot of people, God, I don't know that God designed us specifically never to have something to do. Maybe, even in retirement to have a job and responsibility. I've seen so many people retire and then, their health deteriorate because they're not giving themselves to something, or their mind not function as well as it used to, mental acuity go down. But there's a lot of people who are facing retirement. And so let's just kind of get to the face value of the question. How does a person do with proper tithing when facing retirement and income drops to just Social Security? Well, remember, one of the best things about the concept of tithing, and let me stop and talk about that. Now, I've got a question coming up later on tithing that we're going to tackle this a little more in depth. But as we think about the principle of tithing, the practice of tithing. Now, in the Old Testament, of course, we know we're no longer under the Old Testament law. We know that the Old Testament practice of tithing was a means of funding. It was really their taxation system, where they were funding the things that were happening in the nation of Israel, most specifically the temple and tabernacle sacrifices, as well as taking care of the priests that were there, and the necessary responsibilities that they had to be able to care for them and their needs. And so, again, it was more of a national taxation system, and it wasn't just one tithe. They gave multiple tithes. Some scholars have estimated anywhere from 25% to 30% of what they had would have gone into the taxation. And if you think about, where America's at with the tax brackets and things like that, we can understand what it takes in the nation of Israel to be able to run it. So, tithing was a requirement. It was a biblical requirement for those under the Old Testament law. And again, as we approach it New Testament, we believe in the New Testament pattern of giving. Not to say that we don't believe in tithing, but I use tithing really more as a foundation. I believe in the principle of tithing. It predated the law. The practice of it may not have been as regular prior to the law as what it was underneath the law. But nevertheless, we have examples of people who did it and gave tithes of the things that they had, the spoil that they were given. Abraham gave tithe, and we have some examples of that in the Bible. I believe in the blessing of tithing. I believe that God blesses when we tithe. I use tithing as really pretty much the basis for my personal giving. I start with 10%, and then I add an offering to that. And then on top of that, I give personally to Faith Promise Missions. I also give to our building fund at church, and I do all of my giving through my local church. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But in regards to the way that I personally structure my giving, that's the way that I structure my giving in regards to my local church. And I believe in the blessing of tithing, the blessing that comes from it. So, I believe in the principle. I believe in the biblical principle of tithing, but I believe that the New Testament giving involves more than that, much more than that in our giving. But going back to the tithe, the word tithe in the Old Testament literally means a tenth. That's really what it meant, a tenth, a percentage. And so, I want to encourage you to think about it in that way, as a percentage. When your income goes down, so your tithe would go down. I know people have difficulty with this concept, but God does not require of us that we continue to do more than what we're capable of doing. He only requires of us that we do what's in our power to do. And then when we step out by faith, if he leads us to step out by faith, trust him to provide. But he doesn't always ask us to, stretch beyond our means and ask for miracle gifts. He asks us to do with what he's given us. And a tithe was a tenth, a portion of what he had placed in our hands. So if your income is going down, if you're going from having jobs down to Social Security, your giving's going to go down because it's a tenth, because it's a tithe. And 10% of the number that you had while you were working is going to be more than 10% of what you have that's coming in from your Social Security. So naturally, your number is going to go down. Now, so I think, we say, and then they ask the question, how can you continue to increase tithing with a decrease in income? There's a lot of people that live by faith and they trust the Lord and they give and let God make up the difference. And certainly, if the Lord leads you to do that, I want to encourage you to be able to follow God's leading in that regard. But at the same time, when you're facing retirement and you're facing a decrease in income and Social Security is going to become the primary source of it, it's just natural that the amount of money that you give to your local church is going to go down because of that. Now, let me also preface this with this. There are some people that, they work in their lives to get to a place where they can be free from their job, but also free financially. And while they've stored up and they have supplemental aspects or maybe even other avenues of bringing in income into their lives in their retirement, sometimes they get to a place where, they don't have any kids and they've paid off their house and they're living fairly comfortably. And that retirement gives them the ability, actually frees them to be able to do some things giving wise that they couldn't do before. Sometimes people get to a place, and not everyone, or they get to a place where they've worked and they've saved and they've made some wise investments and decisions, and it gives them the ability to actually be freer to give in their retirement time than they were free to give when they were, locked into meeting their goals and their mortgage and paying for their kids and college and all of that kind of stuff. And so, let me encourage you as you make wise decisions, as you make investments, invest with the thought process of being able to be free, to be able to do things maybe that, you want to do, some things that you enjoy doing, but at the same time, also putting yourself in a position where you can be freer to be able to give and more generous with your giving because you've made good decisions in your retirement savings. And so, the question is not really a hard question, but I know people wrestle with it because, they just can't see it. They wrestle in their mind. I just can't see myself decreasing the amount of money that I'm giving, to my church. But again, we understand that times change, things change. If you move to a different place and your job changed and the amount of money that you were bringing in changed, you would certainly adjust your tithe on that basis. And really the Social Security income that you're having is no different than that. And I would not look at it any differently than that. And while that may be, I don't want to oversimplify the question, but again, now if you want to increase in tithing, increase in missions giving, do more for God, and you've been wise in your investments up to this point, and you're freer to be able to do it, I want to encourage you to be able to do it. I want to encourage you to be able to follow the Lord's leading in that and realize there's a blessing. There's a blessing in tithing. There's a blessing in giving. Jesus said it's more blessed to give than to receive. We know that the scriptures are clear about how God would provide. I know a lot of people that do more in their retirement and can do more in their retirement than they could while they had a lot of other responsibilities. And so let me ask you to consider that as well. All right, the second question that we've got here today is from Luke chapter number 21. It's a biblical question, and it says in Luke 21, verses 20 to 29, where Jesus says to stand firm, who's he talking to? If Christians are already raptured, to whom is he referring? Well, let me read the text in question, and then we'll kind of jump in to this. In Luke chapter 21, we're kind of jumping into the middle of the thought here in verse number 20, but I'll read it anyway. The Bible says, "And when you shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh. Then let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let them which are in the midst of it depart out. And let not them that are in the countries enter thereinto. For these be the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. But woe unto them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days. For there shall be great distress in the land, and wrath upon this people. And they shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led away captive into all nations. And Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles, until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. And there shall be signs in the sun, and the moon, and the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations with perplexity. The sea and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them for fear and for looking after those things which are come on the earth. For the powers of heaven shall be shaken. And when they shall see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory, and when these things begin to come to pass, then look up and lift up your heads, for your redemption draweth nigh. And he spake to them a parable, behold the fig tree and all the trees." So it really kind of goes through verse number 28 of that particular passage. And so you'll notice here the question is, Jesus says to stand firm. Who's he talking to? The overarching things. He tells them about some things that are coming. in this passage. Let me just kind of jump in. Luke 21 is kind of a parallel. It's a parallel to a couple of other passages that you can read in the other Gospels, Mark chapter number 13 and Matthew chapter number 24. The subject matter is the coming of the Lord and the things that will happen in anticipation of Christ's coming, the things we can expect, the things that we know, and this kind of goes back to verse number 7. Jesus, they're talking about, it's really almost identical to Matthew 24. They're talking about the temple. They're talking about the stones. Jesus said, there's coming a day when one stone will not be left upon another. And then they ask him, when shall these things be, and what sign will there be when these things shall come to pass? And Jesus goes on to list for them a bunch of things that are going to happen that are not necessarily signs of the times, but are normal things that should not get a rise out of them, making them think that all of these things are getting ready to come. In fact, he's going to give them a whole bunch of things. He says, many's going to come in the name of Christ. He's going to talk about wars and rumors of wars. He says in verse number 9, be not terrified, for these things must first come to pass. But the end is not by and by. That is, these things are supposed to come. He goes on, talks about things, nation rising against nation, earthquakes in diverse places, famines, pestilences. Verse 11, verse number 12, they'll lay their hands on you, delivering in the synagogue. And so he basically says, settle it therefore in your hearts not to meditate before what you shall answer, for I will give you a mouth and wisdom, which all your adversaries shall not be able to gainsay nor resist. Verse 15. And so again, all this kind of goes back to them. You're going to be hated. You're going to be persecuted. They're going to see a lot of these things, but don't think that these things are indicative of my coming. Don't be deceived by them. The end is not yet. That these things do not signal the end. And then he comes into verse number 20, and he starts talking about what does signal the end. And he's made it very clear. The sign that they're looking for is the abomination of desolation. And he mentions it in verse 20. He says, when you shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh. He's talking about the desolation of Jerusalem. This is coming. In Matthew, in Mark, he's going to talk about the abomination of desolation. Again, he's kind of focusing on all these wars that are going to take place. And he's saying this desolation is really the sign that you're looking for. And he tells them to flee into the mountains. He tells them. Now, again, I personally believe as he's talking here, this is very Jewish in context. And as he's speaking to his disciples, he's not just telling them things that, would be New Testament. I think he's speaking of Jewish things. And when we talk about, verse 24, you'll notice he mentions the times of the Gentiles. He's placing all this in a very Jewish context. You'll notice verse 24, and they shall fall by the edge of the sword and shall be led away captive in all nations. And Jerusalem, notice he's mentioning Jerusalem and the Gentiles. So he's really laying out really a plan here. And really most of what he's saying here is related to Jews and the Jewish understanding of looking for the coming of the Messiah. And then in verse 25, he talks about signs in the sun and the moon. Of course, we see this at the beginning of the tribulation period, men's hearts failing them, verse number 26. And then they shall see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. And I believe that he's referring in verse number 27 to that second coming when Jesus comes and at the culmination, at the end of the tribulation period, not at when he's coming to take his people out. Matthew 24 would also bear this out. Jesus is coming in judgment. And at this time, he's not coming to rescue people out. He's coming at the end of the tribulation in order to be able to judge nations. And so to whom is he referring? Well, when we answer this question and we understand the rest of the Bible on this teaching, as premillennialists, where we believe Jesus is coming before the millennial reign, and also as pre-tribulationists, where we believe that Jesus is coming prior to the tribulation, we would say that the answer to this question is there are Jews that get saved. There are also others that trust Christ during the course of the tribulation period. People are not restricted from getting saved. The Holy Spirit is convicting. The gospel is being preached. You've got the 144,000, which seem to serve in some capacity evangelistically, reaching people. We actually answered the question about the 144,000 a couple weeks ago. They're doing the work of God. There are people that are being saved. You've got the two witnesses that come in the spirit and power of Moses and Elijah. As they come and they do their work and are persecuted, all these things are transpiring, and people are coming to Christ. They are turning to the Messiah. Jews are turning back to him. Gentiles are being saved, and we're closing in on the closing chapter of this whole thing, this whole book. There are also many, many more who are being betrayed, and many, many more who are following the beast and the false prophet. There are many, many more setting up setting up the economic and the political system of Babylon, buying in and worshiping false worship. But there are people who are being saved. When he talks about standing firm, and he gives them all of these things and tells them what to do, he's referring to the saved Jewish believers and the saved Gentile believers in this time. Just because everybody's raptured out, or the Christians, believers are raptured out, doesn't mean that God is not going to miraculously save and seal a group of people who are going to be his evangelists and preach the gospel. And just because he no longer restrains the world from its sinfulness and from its wickedness does not mean that the Holy Spirit's influence is completely removed, but that there is a continuous conviction, and people, he's the means by which people are regenerated, and they will continue to be regenerated in that time. So, maybe this is something we need to revisit at some other point, but there's a lot that question is maybe seems straightforward from the text, but again, it involves really a whole understanding, complete understanding of how we would view those end times and the tribulation period, and this text, as well as Matthew 13 and Mark 13 and Matthew 24, which would also kind of help undergird the teaching of what we read here in Luke chapter number 21. So it's definitely referring to saved people, and because there are saved people who get saved during the tribulation period, and God is sealing them and protecting them during that time, and they need this encouragement, which they will read. So that's Luke 21, verses 20 to 29. Now, we are making progress as I look out over it. I've got about 10 questions here that are left. And so as I get a little bit lower, I start to get a little nervous, and I want you to send me some questions. I hope that you will participate with us and send us some questions here for our next Thoughtful Thursday. I've got some that I'm going to answer, and we're going to jump into those, Lord willing, next week. I want to thank you so much for joining us today. Join us on Tuesday as we continue in our study of Hebrews chapter number 6. We've had a great study in the book of Hebrews. We hope you'll join us on the Tuesday broadcast of Wisdom in the Word. Thank you for joining us on this Thursday broadcast. We hope these questions have been a help and a blessing to you. God bless you wherever you are. God bless the rest of your day. Take care.